Attacks on churches across America are getting more and more common. In fact, today we look at an article showing the numbers are growing. The prosecution of those that commit these church attacks are, well, not much to talk about. In fact, we're going to look at a story today where a church vandal is sentenced with 0 jail time. 0. Elon Musk, in other news, does a masterclass on how to handle the accusation of hate speech. I mean, it really is amazing. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Then we move to Minnesota, where you can now go to hear Muslim prayers broadcast across the city over loudspeakers at all hours of the day with no restrictions. What does this say about religious freedom? We'll talk about that. And speaking of religious freedom, it appears to be confirmed now that the FBI was, in fact, planting agents in Catholic churches to try to find domestic terrorists or something. Yeah, that smells like freedom. Anyway, I'm thinking the authors of the Constitution might have something to say about that. All that and more today in current events from a Christian perspective. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public again. I'm Matt Odegaard, your host as always, and I really appreciate you stopping by today. You are what makes this all work. I'm just doing this for you. I'm trying to give you a service. I'm trying to give you current events from a Christian perspective, because who has time to go through all of the headlines? A good friend of mine the other day looked at me and goes, how do you know all of the things that are happening all of the time? I don't know. It's something that I love doing. I just love being informed. I want to help you be informed, so I select certain things. They may not be the things that you're that interested in, but they're things that I'm interested in, and these things illustrate current events from a Christian perspective. To me, they illustrate how to live out your faith, or something that is going to be coming against your faith that you're going to have to make a decision on. You're going to have to decide how you live. And this goes right along with Peter, when Peter says, hey, you should have an answer for the hope that you have. You should know your faith well enough that you can express your faith even when confronted with whatever crazy thing is going on in the culture. So I want to help you with that. That's my goal. I've been a pastor for 20 years plus. I've been in the church literally my entire life. I am not claiming to know anything more than anybody else, but I've spent a lot of time in the Word. I've spent a lot of time with crazy philosophy. I can't even say philosophy books. Anyway, if I knew how to pronounce philosophy, whatever, I would be able to help you. But anyway, I was reading this. This is going to look ridiculous, but this is a ginormous red book that's called The Christian History of the Constitution of the United States of America, Christian Self-Government with Union. I know no one else reads these ridiculous books, but I like reading these books. So I was reading this book, and we're going to actually look at it. Don't check out yet. We're just going to look at a little, seriously, 4 sentences out of this book. But I think it's going to be worth it. I think you're going to like it. I like reading this stuff, even if I can't pronounce it right the first time. I like reading it, and I like helping others understand how to live out their faith. That was a long explanation to say, I hope you appreciate this. If you do, like, subscribe, share, send it. If you don't, seriously, just take your phone, throw it into the pond that you're driving by right now, because you're not going to need it where we're going. Okay, anyway, so I just want to help you learn how to do this. If you haven't already, audio listener, I love you. I really do. If you want to see some of the things, like for instance, we're going to look at a video recording of Elon Musk's interview with this guy. We're going to look at how he deals with hate speech in this interview. It is unbelievably good. You don't need to see it, but if you want to see it, you can go to churchpublic.com or YouTube. If this is posted on YouTube, hopefully it is. My goal is to have it there. I'm not saying I'm not going to do it. I'm saying sometimes they don't like the things that I post there. Tech overlords, please love me. Anyway. So I would love for you to watch the video if you're interested. If not, leave a comment, like it, share it, subscribe, whatever. I appreciate it. So before we get to some of this other news, I feel like we have to check in with Mr. Beast. Now, you may not have ever heard of Mr. Beast. That's fine. I know some of us parents, some of us, I'll throw me into the middle-age class, I guess. I don't know where I am in this time. I'm wearing a shirt with cactuses on it, so I don't know what that means for me. Anyway, if you have never heard of Mr. Beast, I guarantee you, with a pretty much 100%, I'll hedge that a little bit, 99% certainty, your kids have heard of Mr. Beast. I guarantee this is true, and we have to talk about it. I talked about him the other day. But it was a good experience. He helps people. I mean, he is unbelievably generous. I've watched many of his videos. My kids have watched way more videos than I have, and it's generally great. He is really helping people. He's very generous with his money. He's clearly making tons of money in these silly and dumb videos on YouTube. I mean, like, really, they're mostly dumb. But some of them, they really help people, giving them cars. And on one, he gave a bunch of people sight. Like, he literally paid for surgeries so people could not be blind anymore. I mean, like really cool things. However, I hate to do this. I mean, but we have to talk about this. So this is Mr. Beast. Again, if you're just listening, I'll describe kind of what's happening in some of these pictures. This is why you want to see the video, people. So this is Mr. Beast. Again, pretty great guy. Like, I don't know his faith situation. I have no idea, and I hope that if he hasn't already, he comes to find Jesus. But he has a sidekick. His sidekick is named Chris. He's on a lot of videos. Again, if your kids have seen this, they know Chris. Chris is on a lot of these videos. And I hate to personally, talk about this, but we have to, because I know a lot of kids out there see this, and because they're going to run into this now, they have to understand how to deal with this. And you, as a parent, you need to be able to equip them to deal with this kind of thing. That's why I'm sharing this information. So Mr. Beast, he has a sidekick. I don't know what to call him, whatever. I'm just going to call him a sidekick, named Chris. And Chris has been on a ton of the videos. And this is a picture of Chris with his lovely family. This is Chris with his wife and little kid. I think the kid now is like 2, something like that. Amazing. Wonderful, right? But here's where the story just goes off the rails a little bit. So Chris has decided, I think the progression goes, he decided he was non-binary, and then he has now gone full transgender. He believes he is now a woman, and he has been taking hormone replacement therapy, HRT, in order to go through this transition from man to woman, which of course is not actually possible, but this is what people are doing these days. Here's a picture of Chris now. As you can see, he doesn't look... I mean, I don't know what to say. I never know how to do this. To me, he still totally looks like a dude. He just looks like a dude with long hair, but now apparently he's wearing a dress, so that makes him a woman. This is the culture that we're living in now. You just decide, I'm going to be a woman, so you put on a dress or some makeup or have hormone therapy, and now you're a woman, even though... whatever, it is what it is. So it's really sad. We can pray for Chris that he figures this out. And here's why we have to talk about this. Your kids watch this. I know your kids watch this, and I'll tell you this too. And I guard my kids fairly strictly on what they watch, when they watch, whatever. And I have allowed them to watch some of this Mr. Beast stuff because, as I mentioned, I watched a bunch of it. It is generally wholesome, sometimes ridiculous. They like blow stuff up. I think they were the ones who tried to see like if they could get a like drop something from space. I mean, there's this whole thing. Like, some things they do are ridiculous. Fine, whatever. But a little bit of fun never hurt anybody for the most part. But this is where we have to get into what is really going on in culture, and your kids know and watch this. He's arguably the most popular YouTube star in the world. I think he has hundreds of millions of subscribers and views on literally every video about whatever ridiculous thing it is. But now Mr. Beast is going to be supporting the trans agenda on his show, which hundreds of millions of people, many kids, probably your kids, watch. So Chris came out with this tweet. He says, in case you missed it, informed consent HRT, again, that's hormone replacement therapy, saved my and many others' lives. A hurdle some people have to jump through to get life-saving, gender-affirming healthcare in a first world country is wild to me. Just make people make informed decisions about their own bodies. That was the tweet from Chris. But here's the problem, and I have to say this, and I don't mean to be specific towards this particular human, but this is an example, and it is a super visible example, which is why you put this out into the world. So we now have to respond to it, and we have to say, well, but you had a responsibility, sir. Chris, you got married. You had a child. Your responsibility now is a husband and a father. You don't get to one day wake up and decide, oh, never mind, I don't want to be a husband and a father anymore. Now I'm just going to be a woman and just forget my role as a husband, forget my role as a father, and just be a girl, which, by the way, isn't possible. But this is a problem. This is a problem. Like, you have missed the responsibility. You have chosen for yourself. You chose that responsibility when you decided to get married. And as far as I can tell from research, he is in the process of divorce at this point. So I just feel terrible for the wife. I feel terrible for the child. This is where, hey, you say this is life-saving healthcare, but what about your wife? What about your child? What are you doing for their life? What are you doing for the responsibility that you created that now you are leaving behind, saying, well, I'm going to choose me? And this is the problem with the culture that we're in. The culture that we're in says, you be you, you do you, live your truth, forget anybody else. If anybody else gets in your way, just get rid of them. I mean, that is the illustration here. The illustration is you do whatever selfish thing you want to do. And if you have a wife, if you have kids, that doesn't matter because you're happy. And that is the ultimate selfish example of what this culture wants to do. And here is where you run into you. Now I'm talking to you, listener, watcher. You are going to run into this because I guarantee your kids have watched this and they may continue to watch this unless you tell them not to watch this anymore, which may be a suggestion, or at least have a really, really serious and specific conversation about this because now they are going to see this. And when I talk to my kids about this, because I don't watch it all the time, again, I let my kids watch it sometime, and they knew about this before I did. That's the danger here. My kids knew about this crazy transition, this transition that Chris had been undergoing before I knew. And that's the problem here. And I really try to watch what they watch. I really try to pay attention to this. And I thought it was good, wholesome fun. And this is the culture. This is the way it's going. Now, we have a lot of conversations in my house, very awkward conversations in my house. I hope that you do too, but this is my illustration. Even you have to have these conversations probably before you want to, probably in more detail than you want to at younger ages than you want to. This is just the reality of the culture that we're in, and they have forced us to have these conversations before we want to. So we have to do this. So Mr. Beast, he did give a response to this. His response was not a video so far. It's not elaborate. It was a very small response. There was a user on social media called M Alpha, I guess, who tweeted, "In a few years, look back at this thread and remember, they were never your friends. Only yes men are cowards. Hope you come out of this safe." In other words, they were asking Mr. Beast to come out and say, doing transitions is not appropriate and is degrading to your wife and child, etc. Mr. Beast responded, quote, "Opinion irrelevant, ratio," end quote. And that's it. In other words, again, if you don't understand the social media language, I don't care what you have to say. This is ratioed, and I'm going to support my friend. And here's the problem. And I actually feel a little bit bad for Mr. Beast, but this is one of those moments where you have to choose a side and you have to have courage. I would suggest that people have courage, but this is why I'm bringing this to you. Beast was forced to take a side. Either he denounced the trans ideology as not real and not biologically possible, not even to mention against Christianity, but just not real and not biologically possible. But he would have dealt with the hate for probably millions upon millions of woke people around the world. Or, that was one choice, or he could side with his newly formed trans friend Chris and promote this trans agenda 100%. This is a great illustration. There is no middle way. There is no third way. You are either for the culture or you are for truth. You cannot blur the lines. You personally will have to make this statement eventually. You're going to have to. This culture will come for you. You can't stay silent forever. You had better figure out what you are going to say. This is the courage part. Either you can be right and true and at the same time probably hated, or you can be loved by the culture but be enemies of God and reality. This is the verse that I thought about when we were processing through this. Mark 8:36, Jesus says, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" I think that's the place that we are. The world is going to say, do what we say what we do, accept us 100%, or we're going to hate you, or do the right thing and the world is going to hate you. I mean, this is the reality. And this is why Jesus right before this in Mark 8 says, you need to deny yourself. You need to not follow your own selfish things, but rather do the right thing. And more, we're going to have to decide to do this. That was longer than I meant to spend on that one, but I think it is an important one for us to understand and realize, because this is going to affect you. It's going to affect your kids. You're going to have conversations about this. You're going to have to censor what they see and decide, how do you deal with this? Because this is the reality of the culture that we live in now. All right, so moving on to more church news. There are increasing church vandals. The attacks on churches in terms of vandalism, in terms of Even church people have been attacked. It increases and increases. According to this, 69 acts of vandalism against churches occurred in the first quarter of the year, constituting a significant increase in the number of attacks compared to previous years. Family Research Council released a supplemental report outlining, quote, hostility against churches, end quote, in the first quarter of 2023. This is from ChristianPost.com. The report documents the damage done in attacks on churches, organizing them into 5 categories: vandalism, arson, fire gun-related incidents, bomb threats, and other category. 53 of these attacks were vandalism, 10 arson, and 3 gun-related incidents, and then there were 3 bomb threats and others. The attacks are through 29 states. North Carolina was the highest number. Ohio and Tennessee, Florida, Missouri, Pennsylvania had 4 each, and there was a bunch of others that had 3 and less. But this is, I think this is important to bring to your attention because this is the state that we're in. We talked about this when we talked about the Trans Day of Vengeance. We talked about this with the attack on the Christian school. We talked about this with the attack on Riley Gaines, the swimmer who was standing up for the belief that women are women and shouldn't be forced to swim with men in competitions, and was also attacked. This is the culture. This is the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, if you will, that is riled up into this really aggressive state that they believe, the trans community believes, there is an actual genocide against them, and the only way they can stand up is to physically do things against the other side. And more, they see the other side, their opponents, their enemies, as Christians, because Christians believe that we were made male and female. So these two worlds are crashing together more and more. And on the one side, we need to know that churches are being vandalized, attacked, people are being attacked more and more. But on the other side, we also need to remember as Christians, and this is going to be maybe the harder one for some of us who are passionate about this. And I'll just say it this way: don't take the bait. Don't take the bait. I think there are those in the media, there are those in politics for sure, who want you to be frustrated by this to the point of your action. And I would encourage you, I would pray, I would say as strongly as I can, don't take the bait. Do not get angry about this. Do not ever, never get violent about this. Don't. This is not the way. It's not the way of Jesus. It's not the way to handle this. We need to pray for those that persecute you. We need to pray for those that are against you. But at the same time, we need to know this is happening. So there's awareness that we need to understand. And then in terms of action, we need to speak truth about these things and not respond in anger or violence ever. That's the reality of this world that we live in. But we need to understand that it's important to not respond to this. And that's going to be difficult for some, but I just plead with you, don't take the bait. That's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for someone to become violent through this and then to lay the hammer down and say, see, Christians are evil and bigoted and violent. That's what they're waiting for, and they want that. So please don't take the bait. On the other side of this is the Department of Justice, for those that have gone the other way, right? So we have all of these churches that are getting attacked, and I search for articles where those that perpetrate these attacks on churches get some form of justice or get arrested or whatever. The arrests are very low still. I think there were 2 or 3, not very many. And those that are arrested, here is from the National Review. I don't know if I have a picture of this. Let's see. I don't have a picture of this right here, but those that are arrested are not tried and charged. So this, according to the National Review article, the DOJ recommends no jail time for trans Catholic church vandal. So according to the National Review, the Department of Justice recommended a sentence for, quote, a transgender individual who vandalized the St. Louis Catholic Church in Bellevue, Washington. And so that sentence for this trans-identified individual who did attack this church is 0 jail time. This individual, 31-year-old male who identifies as a woman, this is according to National Review, quote, admitted to vandalizing the church last summer. So admitted to it, admitted they did it. vandalized the church, smashing glass doors, spray painting a number of profane messages, including an attack on Catholicism. They said, or wrote, quote, "Rot in your fake hell," which is a funny statement because if you don't believe in hell, whatever. Okay. And they declared the Catholic Church to be women haters. I won't even talk about that. So this particular individual, quote, also admitted to destroying a statue of the Virgin Mary, assaulted a church worker, and resisted arrest. So this is not a non-violent person. And the United States Justice Department recommends 0 jail time. Zero jail time. I think they got some amount of community service. I didn't even write it down because they did all of this and got 0 jail time. Just a slap on the wrist. Hey, please don't do this anymore, sir or ma'am. I'm not even sure at this point. And just for comparison, remember Mark Houck. This is a picture if you're just watching. I mean, again, looks like a lovely family. This guy, I want to say 7 kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 7 kids. And he was arrested by the FBI at gunpoint at his home at dawn in front of his wife and children. Okay, right? So FBI comes, guns drawn, in front of his family. They're crying and screaming because they don't know what's happening to dad. And if you just look at this guy, which just looks like a dad, and he was arrested, he was charged, and he was going to serve 11 years in jail. 11 years. He was going to be sentenced to 11 years in jail. Now, fortunately, he was acquitted of this because what he did was stand in front of a abortion clinic, and one of the, I don't know, volunteers, workers, somebody got aggressive with his son and was yelling at him, may have even pushed him. So this guy pushed the guy back. I guess the guy fell down. And so for that, he was going to serve 11 years, where this other story that we just watched, right? That story, this guy admitted to vandalizing, attacking, resisting arrest, 0 jail time. So it's another issue. Again, I'm not even complaining at this point. I just want you to know there are 2 tracks of justice. If you are on the side of the culture, you basically get, hey, try to be better, or maybe a sideways, hey, congratulations, you did a good job. Or if you're on the side of truth, if you're on the side of God or the church, you may go to jail for a long time. Just know that this is the world that we live in, and be smart about it. Okay, let's move on from this story because I want to show you how Elon handled the claim of misinformation and the claim of hateful speech. Now I wanted to cut this clip down because it's a little bit long. It's a couple minutes, but it's so good. I think you should watch it. So if you haven't seen this online, I'm just going to play the whole thing because what he does is so good that it's worth seeing. And I may pop in a couple times depending on how it goes. But let's watch this and then we'll talk about it for a minute. So let's take a look at what he's got here.
Free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. I mean, some people were brought back who were previously banned for spreading things like QAnon conspiracies. You have people like Andrew Tate who were brought back, who were previously banned for things like hate speech. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like.
Sorry, some technical difficulties here. I just want to pause there and say what he started saying there is, who is the arbiter of free speech, right? Who gets to decide what free speech is? And he says, are you the one who decides what free speech is? Is the BBC the one who decides? And this is a really important question. We have to really land on this question because what is hate speech? Do you determine it? Does the BBC determine it? Does Twitter determine it? Who gets to choose what hate speech is? And that's a really big question, because if, the BBC or the government or Twitter gets to decide what it is, they could decide whatever they want. And the idea of free speech is he said it at the very beginning, you have to be okay with somebody saying something that you don't want to hear. That's the idea of free speech. You can share an opinion, and I may not agree with it. I may not even like it. I may think it's hateful, the thing that you're saying, but I allow you to say it because that's free speech. And I don't like it, but I can counter that idea with better ideas. That's the idea here. This reporter is saying, no, I don't like that. I would rather you cut out the speech that I don't like. Let's go back and hear a little bit more of that. If I can get this technology to work, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false. Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Correct.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes. Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
We've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate speech are you
address?
talking about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
But just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, my for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally, but I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally.
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful. What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm
just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean.
Okay, this is really good here, right? So what he's getting to is, if something is slightly sexist or slightly racist, then it should be banned. This reporter is arguing for the point of view that you don't have free speech. If I think something is slightly sexist, slightly racist, slightly hateful, whatever that is, then it should just be banned. You shouldn't be able to say it at all. And Elon is doing a great job here saying, well, what is the definition of slightly racist? What is the definition of slightly sexist? How do you identify what hate speech is? What is the literal definition of hate speech? And this guy just starts squirming, and it's great. And so then Elon goes on to ask, hey, give me one example of the hate speech that you saw on the platform. Let's take a listen.
By hateful content, and I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
you
don't.
Can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that for you feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
and
said
actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
hang on a second. You said you've seen
following.
more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And
then how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not... I mean, right, and
literally
you can look at something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK. They will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
I mean, this is so good. It's so good. I've watched this so many times at this point, but Elon does so well just dismantling this guy. And here's the thing. Here's what you got to know. And the problem is most people are not as reasonable as this reporter even is. So I give him credit for that. At least the reporter didn't say you're a hateful bigot and I'm going to punch you in the face. But he starts the conversation saying, Twitter has obviously become more hateful, a more hateful, terrible place full of hate and terrible, hateful things. And Elon says, okay, I'm, that's a bad thing. Give me an example. Give me one example of a hateful thing that you saw. The guy's like, well, I mean, over the months, it's totally gotten more hateful. Okay, good. Give me one example. Well, I mean, I didn't see anything. I mean, that guy saw something, and we all know, but it's, I don't have an example. So here's the first rule. If you're going to accuse somebody of something, have a specific example of the thing, right? So that's a deal. And I just love how Elon pushes back and says, hey, wait, you just accused me and Twitter, the whole social media world, of being hateful, and you don't have a example. You don't have one single example of what this hateful thing is. It's just a little bit more hateful or whatever. Now, whether that's actually statistically true, I have no idea. But his point is so good, and this is such a masterclass in pushing back against people who call you hateful. Okay, give me an example of that. Show me. Like, what did I do? What did I do? Well, you're just bad. Why? What did I do? And I think it was fantastic. I love it. And then I just love the end where this guy just squirms and squirms and he just goes, we have other things to do. Let's just move on. Yeah, you better move on because you just got told. Oh, so good. Anyway, all right, let's move to Minnesota. No, that's not real. I've spent time. I went to school partially in Minnesota, and it is very cold there in the winter. I don't want to move there, but we do need to talk about Minnesota because Minnesota now is going to broadcast the Muslim prayers 5 times a day on loudspeaker with no time restrictions. In other words, can be morning, noon, night, middle of the night. Who knows? They're gonna broadcast Muslim prayers over the loudspeaker and whenever you want. You just broadcast that. I mean, it's fine, right? We're just gonna broadcast those things. According to the article that I'm reading here, the citizens of Minneapolis are about to allow Muslim mosques to broadcast their calls to prayer 5 times a day, implementing a plan that's been in the works for more than a year. Disturbing the peace, excessive noise laws will no longer apply. 2 mosques already broadcast their prayers, but advocates expect 4 other locations to join when the new law goes into effect now that the restrictions are removed. Minnesota Executive Director Jelani Hussein told Axios the change sends a message to the world that freedom of religion is practiced here. Freedom of religion is practiced here in Minnesota by allowing Muslim prayers to be proclaimed by loudspeaker across the city. So again, like, this isn't, I get to opt into Muslim prayer. I get to, turn on my phone, turn on my podcast, turn on my TV and listen to Muslim prayer whenever I want to. No, this is imposing your religion on me by saying, I'm going to broadcast by loudspeaker across the city my prayer so that you have to hear it, whether you want to or not. And he says this is an example of religious freedom. So let's turn this around the other way. Is this religious freedom? So if right after your Muslim prayer, I played over my loudspeaker Psalm 23 or the Lord's Prayer or whatever other prayer, or just me talking a prayer, me just praying for 10 minutes across the city, how would you feel about that? I'm kind of thinking, I mean, I could be wrong. I'm kind of thinking that the city wouldn't love that as much. Might be wrong. But I'm not sure this is really religious freedom. It seems more like the city has decided that the Muslim religion is more profitable, more positive, has a better representation than other religions. That's kind of what it seems like to me. But we'll watch this story and see what happens, I guess, right? Okay. We're moving on to Catholicism again, and I don't mean to spend too much time in Catholicism, but we have to talk about it because what we have found is that the FBI, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, that the FBI was accused of planting people, their agents, in Catholic churches to try to find domestic terrorists. And this was based on a leak that had come out a while ago. We'll talk about that here more in a second. But Jim Jordan posted on Twitter the other day, we now know the FBI, relying on information derived from at least one undercover employee, sought to use local religious organizations as new avenues for tripwire and source development. And then gives a brief, I'm not going to read through this at this time, but I'll read a little bit from this National Review article here. So he pointed this out, and this National Review article says the FBI used undercover agent to cultivate sources among Catholic clergy and leadership, House Republicans reveal. As part of its effort to identify extremists in the Catholic Church, the FBI recruited at least one undercover employee to develop sources among the clergy and church leadership. Jim Jordan, representative of Ohio, showed. And I posted that posted that tweet for you. He went on to say, Americans attend church to worship and congregate for their spiritual and personal betterment. They must be free to exercise their fundamental First Amendment rights without worrying the FBI may have planted so-called tripwire sources or other informants in their house of worship. Yes, exactly. I'll read a little more. The Weaponization Committee demanded the FBI turn over information related to its investigation of Catholics over a former FBI agent who leaked a memo entitled, quote, Interest of racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists in radical traditionalist Catholic ideology almost certainly presents new mitigation opportunities, end quote. That was a long memo, but this memo, issued by the Bureau's Richmond field office, relied on information compiled by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, by the way, is a very, very leftist-leaning organization who doesn't like Christianity or conservative, et cetera, et cetera. So this Southern Poverty Law Center alleged extremist Catholic communities that prefer the Latin Mass and hold to conservative social teachings, and thereby, allegedly, based on this Southern Poverty Law Center, note the FBI infiltrated Catholic Mass, especially Latin Catholic Mass, and thought that there would be domestic terrorists there. The memo went on to say, in making this assessment, FBI Richmond relied on key assumption that racially or ethnically motivated extremists will continue to find radical traditionalist Catholic or RTC ideology attractive and will continue to attempt to connect with RTC, radical traditionalist Catholic adherents, both virtually, social media, and in person in places of worship. And Andrew Bailey went on to say, we already knew President Biden was launching an attack on the First Amendment rights of Americans as evidenced by our landmark free speech case, Missouri versus Biden. But now it's clear he will weaponize unelected federal bureaucrats, the FBI, to go after any American who does not worship the, quote, right way. Andrew Bailey is the Republican Attorney General of Missouri, and he wrote that in a statement about the FBI revelations. And so here's the thing, right? We've got to figure this out because we have to understand that we have to understand what a church is. And you're sitting there thinking, like I might have been at the beginning of this conversation, I'm not a Catholic, so this doesn't affect or bother me. But we have to scroll back from that a little bit, and our denominational affiliations aside, ostensibly Christians and Catholics are aiming at Jesus. I have issues with the Catholic Church theologically, but I'm going to leave those on the side for now and just talk about this from a culture versus Christian perspective, because that's what we're looking at, current events from a Christian perspective. This culture does not like Christianity. That much is very clear. However, what we need to understand is that God is sovereign over all. God is the King of Kings. He does set up and appoint kings and rulers. That is who God is from a biblical and theological perspective. Psalm 103, the Lord has established his throne in heaven and his kingdom rules over all. Psalm 103:19. Jesus, in Matthew, Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Matthew 28:18. And then we look at Daniel. This is God speaking in Daniel. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belongs wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He, God, removes kings and sets up kings. God is in charge of the world. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. And Jesus, his son, holds that title now, will relinquish it to God in the end of days, we know in Revelation. But God sets up kings and deposes them. He sets up kings and rulers. He rules over all of this. The rulers, the kings of the world, for all ages then, have tried to remove and replace the power of God, and this really is no different. We must take note of it from this Christian perspective. When a ruler, like Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's day or Joe Biden today, goes into the church to try and impede worship or make himself higher than God, we have to pay attention to this. And I know you're saying, well, this happened in the Catholic Church. Yes, it happened in the Catholic Church, but you must know this is not limited to the Catholic Church, and there may even now be agents in other denominations. We have actually no idea. But the fact that it happened at all should give you pause. You should be concerned that the FBI targeted good old Catholics because they are being too traditional. They literally said that. They're being too traditional. And this should make you think twice about the goals of this administration. Simple question for you. Is this administration trying to protect your right to worship, or are they trying to do something else? If the answer is something else or anything else, we have to understand this is a problem. We have to go back right to the beginning of the foundation of America, which was largely in response to the government who wanted to control our worship of God. That is why America was founded in large part. It just really is. I'm going to turn to this giant red book that I've got beside me, again, called The Christian History of the Constitution of the United States of America. It's a very big book. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you. I just want to read a little part here. And this little part is we'll just start with the Constitution. This is the amendment that talks about our worship. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It goes on. I'll even stop at that. I mean, this government is not supposed to be allowed to stop our worship or impede our worship in any way. And yet sending an FBI agent into the worship service kind of seems like that is. I mean, you can read it however you want to read it, but that's what I'm reading. Then I'm going to read this from George Washington because I just really like this one. The liberty enjoyed by the people of these states of worshiping Almighty God agreeably to their consciences is not only among the choicest of their blessings, but also of their rights. While men perform their social duties faithfully, they do all that society or the state can, with propriety, demand or expect, and remain responsible only to their Maker for their religion, the modes of faith which they may prefer or profess. In other words, George Washington helps us understand and remember that we do the work that we do in the community, in the government, in the state, but the state cannot tell the church what to do. They just cannot. Biblically, constitutionally, that's not allowed. And the Constitution, as you remember, hopefully, does not grant us rights. It protects the rights we have because the sphere of the church and the sphere of government are separate. It gets really sticky and bad when the church tries to take over government, and really bad and sticky when the government tries to take over church. Neither of those work out because that is not the way that God has designed it. And we can read through scriptures about that, but we also see in history it just doesn't work well when that happens. So regardless of the state or the state of the church or the state of the community or anything else, my hope to you, my challenge to you, and all of this, again, I don't say this to complain. I don't say it to scare you. I am not scared of any of this. I just think you should be aware of what's going on and be aware of what you need to do day in and day out to live out your faith. You need to understand that this government is not for you. This government doesn't really care who you are or what you do unless you do something that they don't like. And this government, at least the current leadership, has been very strongly in support of all of the radical ideologies of the left. I mean, they just are in support of all of it. And it seems like they don't want to approve of any of the conservative, or I would go further and say Christian values that come before. The traditional values they just don't like. And they don't like it so much that apparently they're willing to put people into your church to make sure you're not doing something that is anti their ideals. And this should concern you to some degree. Again, I'm not scared, I'm not alarmed, but you need to understand that is happening and probably will continue to happen more because this culture is not getting more Christian at the moment. It is getting more secular. Now, I think the church is still growing. I do actually believe that. There are a lot of positive signs that I see in the younger generation, even though there are negative signs culturally and generally at large. There are positive signs in the amount of younger people who are hungry for spirituality and really for truth. I've seen this statistically and I've seen it anecdotally in some people that I've come into contact with. So I'll just leave you with this because I think this is the place where you need to live and move and have your being, just as Jesus said and reiterated from the old command in the first covenant, and that is to love your God with your heart and your soul and your mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If we do these things, following all that God has taught us in his word, which is the truth and which allows us to know his will, we know and can do the will of God. This is the way that we go forward. We build our families, we build our communities, we build our churches and beyond, and we see what God will do in and through us. For Church Public, I'm Matt Odegaard, and I hope that you will keep the faith.